So my research basically looks at why managers may not always act in the best interests of shareholders, and what are things that investors can do to sort of discourage bad behavior by managers. Now, generally speaking, we think of there as being sort of three main ways in which managers behave poorly. One is that they may not exert enough effort. Right, because effort's costly. If we don't monitor them as an investor, they won't exert it. The second is that they may actually take actions that benefit themselves but not the shareholders. Okay. The third is where my research is focused, and that is that managers may do what my co-author and I call play it safe, and that they may not take the risks that are necessary to create value for the shareholders. Now, managers may not do that because they have a lot tied up into these companies. If it goes south, their career could be adversely affected, their personal wealth could be affected, much more so than a diversified shareholder. So they're going to want to take less risk. So my co-author and I are trying to determine whether this playing it safe is sort of a salient problem for investors. And the way in which we did that is we looked at, well, what do firms do when they become protected from a hostile takeover? Okay, so what happened is that in the U.S., a bunch of different states passed these laws, which made it difficult to do a takeover of a company located in those states. Now, that's interesting because we in finance think of a takeover as sort of a disciplining device on a manager, and that if that manager is performing poorly, doing things that destroy shareholder value, it's going to push down their share price, and it's going to basically make it easier for another group of investors to come in, buy up the company, fire the manager, and improve value. So now, if I'm a manager and I'm not worried about that anymore because my state just passed a law that kind of protects me from a takeover, I can now act more on my own interests rather than that of shareholders. So the question is well, what do managers do when they become protected? And so what my co-author and I found is that when they became protected by these state-level laws, they took less risk. We observed stock volatility go down. We observed cash holdings go up. We also observed them begin doing more diversifying acquisitions, which prior research has shown is one way in which managers try to reduce their risk. And it doesn't look like this behavior is in the interest of shareholders either. We can see that these acquisitions have negative announcement returns, and we can also see that they're concentrated among the companies where we would think that this playing it safe is more important, firms that are at greater risk of distress, and firms where the managers have more personal exposure to the company's risk. I would say one of the key takeaways of our research is that this playing it safe behavior by managers, this incentive to not take on risks that may create value, can have implications for a company's overall value, investment, and growth, right? If you think about it, in order to create value for shareholders, at some level you have to take risks. Products that have turned out to be great in the past, someone took a risk to create that product. And if managers aren't doing that, then they're not necessarily creating value. Another sort of takeaway is that this playing it safe, in general, is probably going to be very hard to detect for a shareholder. Right? We don't observe what are the investments that the managers choose in between, and we don't observe what their expected returns are, what their risks are. We don't know if that managers may be sort of avoiding certain projects that could create a lot of value, but they're worried about the risk and the personal exposure to that risk. Or, we see these companies holding more cash. Now, these companies say they're holding cash because they're trying to make sure they have investment, the cash there to do an investment if it comes along. Is that true? Or is it they're holding the cash because they're worried about distress and they're just trying to make sure that the company doesn't run into problems in the future and it's not really creating value for shareholder? That's hard for a shareholder to know, but sort of what our research is trying to point out is that managers may in general be trying to take on less risk than what we would prefer them to do, and therefore it might be important to actually encourage more risk-taking. I wouldn't say it surprised me, but I suspect it would surprise others. And that conclusion is that we observed that this sort of playing it safe behavior by managers was concentrated among those that had the largest ownership stakes in their companies. Now, typically we would teach our students here at Wharton that if you want to encourage managers to work hard and not waste cash, you give them more stock in the company, more of an ownership stake. Now, it's true that that will make them work hard and not waste cash, but what is often overlooked in practice is that it can actually make some problems worse, particularly the playing it safe. By giving them more ownership, you've just exposed them to more of the company's risk. You've given them an incentive more to play it safe, and that's what we picked up in the data, is that when they had more ownership stakes, this conflict appeared to be prevalent in the data. So I would say one of the practical implications of our findings is that as an investor or as a shareholder, if you don't think the manager is taking on actions that are going to create shareholder value, it's important to understand why they may not be doing that if you're going to try to solve it. Right? I'll give you an example. So the Wall Street Journal ran a really nice article last summer where basically the author of the article was bemoaning in their view that firms in the U.S. and entrepreneurs in the U.S. have become soft on risk. And because these companies aren't taking risk in the U.S., this is why the U.S. growth and investment has been weak over the last 5-10 years. But the question is why aren't they taking these risks? Right? If we as shareholders think it's because it just requires a lot of effort and the managers don't want to exert that effort, well, then one solution is give more ownership in the company. Okay? On the other hand, if they're not taking that risk because they want to play it safe, they're worried about their careers, then the solution becomes quite different in that you don't necessarily want to give more ownership because that it just exposes them more to the firm's risk. Instead, you might want to think about other things like granting them options, which past research, including my own, has shown encourages risk-taking. In terms of playing it safe, in our research, we looked at large U.S. companies that are mostly public. But my guess is that this playing it safe is also salient for entrepreneurs. Right? So think of like a student that graduates from here at Wharton. Right? All of them are going to have an opportunity to go get a great job at a company that has a nice salary, good benefits, and good health insurance. Now, some of these students may also have a great idea for a new company or a new product that they could go do it instead. But obviously going and starting your own company is risky. And I would guess that many of these individuals don't go and do that. And instead, they just going to go take the safe job that has the salary and the fixed health benefits rather than go start a new company. And I would term that as potentially playing it safe, and I think it could be quite important. I think probably the biggest misperception that our study might dispel is this idea that giving managers greater ownership stakes in their companies necessarily ensures that they behave in the best way, right? And that there's a lot of attention paid recently because of the financial crisis, and that you want to give managers more ownership stake. You want to give them these restricted stocks that tie them to the long-term risk of the company. Now, that's probably going to get rid of some problems, but it could actually make other problems worse, and in particular, playing it safe. Now, if they're tied to the long-run risk of the company, they have a lot more to worry about. They may actually take on less risk than what we as shareholders want them to. They may forego doing these projects that would create a lot of value just because they're risky. I think one thing that's different about my research relative to other research on why managers might misbehave is that most past research is focused on the idea that managers don't exert enough effort and that they want to live what we call the quiet life. They don't want to work hard. Whereas my research is showing that, in fact, managers may be exerting a lot of effort, but this effort is not directed in ways that are necessarily trying to create shareholder value. Rather, it's effort directed at maybe reducing the company's risk for the manager's personal benefit, but not that of shareholders. One thing that I've been thinking about looking at next, which I haven't started yet, was whether maybe the recent healthcare law has an effect on individuals' choice to be an entrepreneur. Right? So if you think about it, prior to the healthcare law being passed, if you're an individual and you start a company, it's really hard to get health insurance as an individual. And so your alternative was to go get that 9-to-5 job where you can at least have the health insurance. Now that the law's passed and we have the marketplace and it's much easier for individuals. And my guess is that you're probably going to see a lot more people choosing to go and start their own companies, knowing that they can get this health insurance without having to go get that steady 9-to-5 job.